To start this morning, we have a great panel of cooperative CEOs who will be discussing leading change through industry within their organizations. The panel is going to be moderated by Courtney Stewksbury Parker from ACES. Courtney is the Associate General Counsel and Director of Legal Services for ACES, and as a lawyer for the company, Courtney provides advice to ACES on a variety of matters, including those related to energy policy, energy transactions, business law, corporate governance, contracts, and energy regulations. Our panelists this morning are Donna Walker, Suzanne Lane, and Sonia Cox. Let's welcome our panel.
Thank you, Don. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As Don mentioned, it is my pleasure today to moderate the CEO panel. And our panelists today are Donna Walker, President and CEO of Hoosier Energy, Suzanne Lane, Executive Vice President and CEO of Kansas Electric Power Cooperative, or KEPCO, and Sonia Cox, President and CEO of Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, or SMECO. Our fourth panelist, Lisa Johnson, CEO and General Manager of Seminole Electric, was unexpectedly unable to join us. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. Thank you for joining us, ladies. I've asked each of you to tell us a little bit about the cooperative in which you serve. Donna, could you tell us about Hoosier?
Sure, thanks, Courtney, and good morning, everybody. Hoosier Energy is a generation and transmission cooperative located here in Indiana, and we serve 18 member distribution cooperatives that serve the southern half of Indiana and also a portion of southeastern Illinois. When you look at our members, the composition in total collectively for the members, their customer mix includes about 57% residential loads, 27% industrial, and 16% commercial. Now, the individual members themselves, you see a variety around that, but that's what the mix is collectively. Also, there's a lot of diversity in that industrial class. So that includes auto and auto parts related manufacturing, some steel loads. It includes stone quarries and coal mining loads, service. So it's a wide variety as far as the industries that the members serve. And then just among the members themselves, there's no member system that comprises more than 10% of Hoosier's total sales. So a lot of diversity when you look at our members. When you look at our resource mix, currently we have just over 1,900 megawatts. And today, half of that capacity is provided by 2 units that are coal-fired, located at our Merrim generating station. And it's situated in southern Indiana, actually in the middle of one of our member system service territories. And that's a facility that came online in the early 1980s. We're around 37% then natural gas, and that includes both combined cycle as well as peaking resources. And then 7% renewables. So we've been continually to build our renewable portfolio slowly over the past several years. And then finally, we also have around 8% of our capacity provided through long-term contracts that we have with an IOU here in the state to receive capacity off of their total system mix. So that's our resource mix today, but we're changing. So in early 2020, our board approved a new long-range resource plan. And with that, we're going to be transitioning to a more diverse portfolio. And that includes plans to retire our Merrim station in 2023, so not in the too far distant future. And transition to a mix that is, again, more diverse with some wind, more solar. Natural gas will continue to be an important part of our resource mix. And also storage. Not so much storage right at the beginning of the transition, but we think that there's a lot of opportunity for storage technology to take off, and we see that being part of our mix further into the future. We're a member of MISO, and also PJM, but most everything we do is through the MISO. So obviously a lot of what's going on there is very important to us and our members. On the transmission side of the business, we're a transmission owner. We have about 1,700 miles of transmission line, and we're interconnected with 7 major utilities. And the most significant of the mix is with Duke. Actually, just over half of our member load is served directly off of Duke's transmission system. Hoosier Energy owns the distribution substation, so I know that that's something that's a little bit different. Not a lot of G&Ts do that, but we actually own those on behalf of the members. And so that's kind of our operational side of the business. We're currently rated by Moody's and Standard & Poor's. With Moody's, we're A2 with a positive outlook. Standard & Poor's, recently we were upgraded, we're A+ with a stable outlook. And we have about $1.7 billion of assets. We currently have just over 400 employees. And then finally, I think one thing that's interesting is when you look at our 18-member board of directors, that's a pretty diverse group as well, because about 1/3 of those directors have been on the Hoosier Energy Board now for over 10 years. We have just under 1/3 that have been on the board between 5 and 10 years, and just over 1/3 that have been on the board less than 5 years. And even within that group, there are 3 directors who have been with us for less than a year. And that really provides, I think, a lot of good perspective, because it's a great combination of perspectives that have historical experience with the way things have been, along with folks that are coming in with new ideas and asking questions just to understand how things got to where they are. And so I think it really provides us with a really healthy dialogue when we're talking about things in the boardroom. So that's a little bit about Hoosier.
Thank you, Donna. Suzanne, could you tell us about KEPCO?
Sure, I'm on here. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much, Courtney. Thank you to Mike and his team for the invitation to participate in this panel. It's quite an honor to be sitting here with these esteemed colleagues. So a few things about KEPCO. We are a G&T cooperative with 16 member-owner distribution cooperatives that serve ultimately about 200,000 rural Kansans in about the eastern 2/3 of the state. We are based in Topeka, which is the state capital, and that makes it wonderful and easy for regulatory and legislative advocacy and involvements. We're fairly small G&T, so in 2020, our coincidental peak load was about 400 megawatts, and our non-coincident peak load was 500 megawatts. And so a lot of the reason for the difference is a fairly aggressive load management program that we have in conjunction with our members. We also have a 15% self-supply provision with our members where they can self-supply up to 15% of their energy needs. Several unique aspects about KEPCO. Like Hoosier, we are just over 50% of our load is residential based, with the base being commercial, largely in the agribusiness and oil and gas sectors. We have a for-profit engineering subsidiary, which I don't know if everyone knows about us. And so we provide engineering services for our members and some non-member co-ops throughout the state. Long story short, as I'm sure a lot folks can attest to, we do a lot with a little. And so in addition to the power supply and transmission services that we provide for our members and the for-profit engineering side, we do all of that with just 25 FTEs, which we're very proud of. As far as the generation power supply side of our business, we are a proud co-owner of the only nuclear plant in Kansas, which is Wolf Creek, a 1,200 megawatt single unit site. We're also proud co-owners of one of the country's newest coal plants, which is the Iatan 2 unit, about an 880 megawatt unit just across the state line over near Weston, Missouri. We fully own a 20 megawatt diesel generation facility and also a 1 megawatt solar installation. And then the balance of our portfolio includes purchases of coal, hydro, wind, solar, and natural gas through power purchase agreements and/or the market. As far as the transmission side of our business, we are a transmission-dependent utility, so we're not a transmission owner. We have load in 5 transmission zones, which I understand is fairly rare, all within the Southwest Power Pool, and so we work closely with all 5 transmission owners and the SPP in talking about reliability, projects, cost allocation, and those types of topics. A little known fact about us that we're very proud of is our fuel diversity. So currently, on an annual basis, about 65% of our annual energy needs are carbon-free, come from carbon-free resources. We're very, very proud of that, largely due to our nuclear and hydro interests, but we're also, as I mentioned already, a proud co-owner of a coal plant. And so we balance that messaging in that strategic effort, and always are very proud of that diversity. So those are a few facts about KEPCO. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you, Suzanne. Sonia, would you tell us a little bit about SMECO?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Courtney. Ladies, nice meeting you. SMECO, Southern Maryland Electric Cooperative, is a distribution cooperative, and we're located in, as the name says, Southern Maryland. We have about 170,000 customers, members. And if you're looking at the map and looking at where DC is located, if you look south of there, surrounded by water on 3 sides, that's our service territory. So we're in 4 counties in Southern Maryland. As far as transmission, we own 42 miles of 230 kV transmission, which is under FERC jurisdiction. And we have another 445 miles of 69 kV transmission lines. We connect with PEPCO. We are a PJM member and participate in all things at PJM. We have almost 10,000 miles of overhead and underground distribution lines, and 67% of the distribution system is underground. We have about 17 members per mile, and our peak load is 1,003 megawatts. We are regulated by the Maryland Public Service Commission, which can make life difficult at times, but we have a good working relationship with them and spend a lot of time there and a lot of time on working groups and various things at the commission. We have, we're a little different than you all as far as residential customers. About 91% of our load is residential. But that 91% only contributes 64% to our revenue. So most of our revenue, well, I guess from a ratio perspective, a lot of our revenue comes from a very few customers. We are governed by a 15-member board. I have 3 of them here today, and they promise not to heckle me too much. And we're a proud member of ACES, actually, and work with the ACES staff and see them as an extension of our staff. So we're not a member of a G&T, and we manage our own power supply with the assistance and guidance of the ACES staff. Our portfolio right now contains, for 2020, it was about 18% renewables, 50-some% natural gas. And we sort of go with the fuel mix of PJM, so there's a little bit of coal in there because, we clear in the day-ahead real-time markets there. I think I mentioned that we have, or maybe I didn't, we have 480 employees, and we have 2 regional offices where we manage our service territory from. And that's a little bit about SMECO.
Thank you, Sonia. I appreciate the insights into the cooperatives that you guys serve, that you shared with us here today. I've asked each of you to prepare and to think about what is the biggest challenge you've faced since becoming CEO in your organization. And so I'm going to ask you, and starting with Donna, what's the biggest challenge you've faced since becoming CEO?
Yeah, when I became CEO in November of 2018, I'll kind of back up and talk about what we had been going through for a few months leading up to that point. We'd actually been going through a strategic planning process. And that's something that we hadn't done for a few years. We talked about strategy as part of our business plans and budgeting and so forth, but to really kind of set things aside and just focus on strategic planning, that was something that we hadn't done for a little while. And so one of the priorities that came out of that effort was to focus on our supply portfolio and not just optimizing where we are today, but also thinking about the future. And in particular, looking at Merom, because it's such a large part of our resource mix, and making plans for that and understanding what its future looked like. And so when I became CEO in November, that's the first thing that we tackled, and I would say that that has been the biggest challenge so far. What that process looked like for us, we spent about a year on that, and that is more time than I'm aware of in my 25 years with the company that we've spent on any single topic. And rightly so, because it makes up a significant part of our rate and cost for members. And so one of the first things that we did in that process was that the board and the member system CEOs spent the first board meeting, and we talked about what is important to end consumers at the end of the line when it comes to the resources that provide their electricity. And through that process, we developed the scorecard, right? Because it's all about what's important to the end consumer. And for our membership, they determined that having a resource portfolio that provides for low wholesale rates that are stable and predictable over time, as well as a diverse portfolio and resource mix, and then also that sustainability is important to the membership. So those are kind of the four things that were super important. And then in addition to that, the board decided as we head down this path and we look at our future resource mix, if we decide to make a change and move away from where we are today, then we're going to make sure that we treat our workforce and employees fairly. So that was the premise, and I think that that was super important because it really it guided the decisions that we made as we moved through that. And so, we spent every board meeting, I think, between February of 2020 or February of 2019 and our decision in January of 2020 on the topic. And about halfway through the process, we came to the point where we usually have a 2-day board forum in the month of August. And we devoted a lot of time at that session talking about resource planning. And at that point, I knew we were going to be seeing the first really economic analysis of what our portfolio looked like. And as I saw that, I knew it was going to be a heavy meeting because it really showed that under the various scenarios of the future that we had talked about and decided that we wanted to see how our portfolio would perform in these future scenarios. Merom was challenged in almost all of those. So one of the things that I thought would be really important with that heavy information would be to also couple that with talking about not just the challenge of potentially moving away from a large central station resource that's been so much a part of our identity for nearly 40 years, but we needed to think about the possibilities and the opportunities and why we would do that. So, talking about that, I kind of couched it in the challenge can be moving from that resource, but what if we're doing that because it provides a more diverse resource mix, one that includes renewables and is more responsive to the sustainability point that's very important to end consumers. And what if through that diversity we can provide rates that are more stable and predictable over time? Because when you have one resource that comprises half of your resource mix, it can be fabulous at times. When market prices have been high and the units have been operating, it's been phenomenal. But it can also be a major challenge when market prices are very low. When market prices are high and those units aren't operating, we've had a lot of challenges around that facility over the years. But sometimes it can feel comfortable where you're at because you know what those challenges are. And we forget that there are challenges with today. So we kind of talked about that. We talked about the what if. What if we do that? And what if by moving away into a new type of portfolio in the future, it allows us to incorporate new technologies that aren't even there today. We can build that flexibility into the future portfolio. And also, what if we think about the Merom site itself? There are a lot of infrastructure capabilities already there at the site. What if we locate some of that future generation, like solar and storage and potentially, a bit of natural gas, we locate it at the site and we take advantage of the transmission infrastructure that's already there, that's very valuable. And what if we attract new industries onto that site that can take advantage of the rail and the transloading and the wastewater treatment facilities that are already there at the site? And they can do that located beside some of that new generation that complements their own sustainability goals. And what if when we bring that new industry onto the site, it provides the future job opportunities for the workforce in the community? And what if we can do all of that and that's at a lower cost for end consumers? And so that was super important because when you're talking about closing a facility, it can feel like the end of something. But really, for us, it's just a turning the chapter. It's the end of that chapter, and it's moving forward to something new. So I knew that was going to be super important. So we moved through the process, and I already gave the answer where we ended up, that we are going to close the Miriam station and make the transition that I just described for you. But I think it's been super important to have that future view out ahead of us to get us through those difficult challenges of actually making that happen. So that's been the biggest challenge that I've faced so far.
Quite the challenge, Donna, to close a coal facility. Sonia, could you tell us about the biggest challenge you've faced since becoming CEO at SMECO?
Sure. Well, we've all faced this challenge, but I became CEO on March 1st of 2020, and we all know what happened shortly thereafter. So on March 3rd, we implemented phase 1 of our pandemic response plan, and just kind of hit the ground running, I guess, was one way to put it. So I set up a team, pandemic response team. It included the executive staff, HR, risk management, and that first week we met 3 times, and then for several weeks after we met 3 times a week, just trying to figure out, how do we protect our employees and still provide reliable service. So some of the challenges around doing that was, we would discuss in these meetings. On March 12th, we instituted a travel ban, so no travel for employee-sponsored events. And I think by that time, most of the training and off-site things had been canceled anyway, at least, in our industry. So there wasn't a lot of pushback on that, of course. Canceled off-site meetings. We stopped allowing contractors into our facilities. We urged caution for personal travel. I mean, I can't tell people they can't travel, personally, but we talked about, if you take a cruise, we may put you in quarantine. You might not be able to come back to work for 2 weeks after you get back. Those types of things. Constantly reminding employees not to come to work if they didn't feel well. And on March 12th when the CDC published information that the coronavirus was still considered a low risk. So I'm not sure when they decided it was a higher risk, but early on they still considered it a low risk. I started communicating with employees, and I would send out emails in the beginning, like 2 or 3 times a week, just giving them updates about what we were trying to do as an executive team to protect them and keep them safe. There was a lot of, and I'm sure you all had it as well, but there was a lot of angst and concern. On the employee front, the employees' families, I got emails from spouses saying, what are you going to do to protect my husband while he's in the field? I got phone calls from employees, because for those of you who don't know, I've been at SMECO for 22 years, and for 14 years before I became CEO, I was CFO. So everybody, I know a lot of people, and I'm very, I like to interact with the employees, so they have no problem calling me even now. So if there's a problem, they just pick up the phone and call, which I'm happy about. So on March 13th, we stopped disconnects for non-payment. And it was a couple days later when Governor Hogan, if we hadn't stopped them, he would have said you have to stop disconnects for non-payment. So we did that early on as well. We had to cancel all of our in-person safety meetings, but safety is still very important, especially during this time, because people are, distracted and worried and concerned. So we set up virtual safety meetings for our employees, and we track all that so to make sure that they're doing their safety meetings and briefings. We still do, the tailgate meetings before a job, so they were still having that interaction. We closed our customer service counters. We implemented a telework program for 241 employees, and we did that in 12 business days. So before, the only employees that were really allowed to telework were our contact center employees, and they did it maybe 1 or 2 days a week. So we really weren't set up for the entire population or employee population to be able to telework. So our IT staff did a great job, a fantastic job of getting that done, and we got those people out pretty quickly. We staggered our shift start times for our field crews. My biggest concern was if this gets into the field crews, we had over this time frame, we've had about 250 to 260 employees in quarantine at some point in time because they had been exposed to someone else who had the virus. For the first 6 months, we only had 8 employees who tested positive. And now we've had about 43 total that tested positive, and we're in quarantine. So the field crews were a big concern. We rented some vehicles so that the guys didn't have to all ride in the same vehicle. So, but that caused some other issues where you have so many vehicles on a job site, and we had our vehicle accidents, preventable vehicle accidents, increased because there were more vehicles around. So we still have the rental cars. We're getting ready to change that with the vaccine being rolled out. In Maryland, 70% of the state has been vaccinated at least once. So we're seeing our numbers down in Maryland to about under 2%. So we're getting ready to try to go back to business as usual. But we did end up, at one point, our Leonardtown facility, one of our offices where our southern region is what we call it, those guys that were there, we had to shut that facility down for 14 days total because we had 4 people test positive at once. They were like sharing it. But the health department would shut us down if we had 5. And we did have 2 OSHA recordable incidents. That was one of them. Because if it's workplace spread, then we have to report that. So we had 2 of those. Let me just make sure here. We were able to continue to, we had a couple of storms during that time, so we were still able to get members back on quickly. We ended up moving to our level 3 of our crisis plan on April 6th of last year. I do group texts as well because the guys in the field aren't really good about reading their emails, but they really like getting their text messages. So they all tell me how much they love getting my text messages because they appreciate the fact that they're being kept in the loop and know what's going on. I've done field visits. I like to go out there. They like to talk, so I go out and see how things are, trying to make sure morale is still up. We've had some issues with that, so we're working on that as well. Since March 1st of last year, we've managed to do some other work. I had to hire my replacement, which I did from internally, but we also had a new executive position, a Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, which the board put forth at their last strategic plan. So I recruited and hired a Chief Strategy and Information Officer. He started on August 14th, and he's here as well. So that was a good move. Our Chief Operating Officer decided to retire on January 4th of this year, so I had to replace him. And then we just had executive staff planning session off-site. And while we were there, I realized that just myself and 2 others were the only ones who had done it before, and I hadn't been in this role before. So it was a good planning session. So we did manage to get some other things done, but the pandemic was the hardest challenge that I've had to deal with since taking over.
I think the pandemic posed a lot of challenges for a lot of people in the audience, employees and other staff. Susan, could you tell us about the biggest challenge you've had at KEPCO?
Sure, thank you. So in my 2.5 years in the role, a little over 2.5 years in the role, definitely have experienced many challenges. And Definitely one of them being leading through a pandemic. I think we all in this room can attest to that, and we continue to just want to bow to Sonia for all that she went right out of the gate in her role. So definitely empathize there. So in addition to the pandemic being an unprecedented historical event, the one I'm going to talk about that's been one of the biggest challenges for me to lead through involves something that was spoken about a lot yesterday, which is the polar vortex event, or Winter Storm Uri, that occurred in mid-February. And I, right out of the gate, want to say, I fully appreciate that many of our brother and sister cooperatives throughout the Southwest Power Pool and ERCOT were impacted in varying degrees, and I fully appreciate that. And I know it was much more dire in ERCOT than in SPP. I'm really just going to hit on the impacts associated with KEPCO and just, again, the challenges in leading through that at a high level. The gentleman yesterday covered the event in great detail, so I don't necessarily want to be duplicative there, but to highlight a few key aspects that, again, within SPP were very similar to what occurred in ERCOT. In mid-February, as the temperatures were dropping across the Midwest, we also had snow and ice down to record levels. Electric and natural gas demands increased. I know that's been talked about a lot, but as homes and businesses were trying to stay warm and keep their businesses going, natural gas supply was constrained both to those homes and businesses, but also to generating facilities due to that high demand, and also due to some freezing of facilities as well as the transportation facilities. Wind resources in some locations were limited. And then all of this ultimately not only contributed to the constraints of supply, but also to energy and gas prices skyrocketing. I know for SPP, a new record was set for market energy of over $4,000 a megawatt hour. Gas ended up being a little over $1,000 an MMBTU, to put it into perspective. As a result, SPP then declared multiple levels within their energy emergency alerts, or EEAs, at varying levels throughout that week or so, just really to try to bolster system reliability and mitigate anything from happening or getting even worse or more catastrophic and widespread. These EEAs ranged from some conservative conservation efforts all the way up to rolling blackouts, or, as I've learned now, controlled temporary interruptions is the term you're supposed to use, so I have to doesn't quite roll off the tongue yet, but so an EEA 3 was the most extreme level, and they did call EEA 3s both on February 15th as well as the 16th. And when that was called, that basically essentially required immediate action in the form of those curtailments. So again, this not only signaled the severity once those were called, the severity of the situation, but it was historic, unprecedented within the SPP, and most importantly, uncharted territory for all. So it was one of those that SPP, the transmission owners, and all of us that were involved was very uncharted and learning as we went. Each transmission owner in the SPP then was given a directive on those 2 days as to how many megawatts to shed. And again, immediate action had to be taken to prevent catastrophic, lengthy, widespread system failures. So all of that leads to the first challenge for this leader sitting before you. First challenge was overcoming denial. So I've been in the industry a little over about 23 years. I know many in the room have been in the industry a lot longer. And planned curtailments, rolling blackouts, whatever you want to call them, is something that you knew was a possibility. It had been planned for, drilled upon, talked about, but you just never think it's going to actually come to fruition. I think back to the times of the late 90s, early 2000s when folks were low on capacity. It was talked about then. During the cross-state air pollution rule, the Casper times, it was talked about and planned for then. Transmission owners are required to have manual load shed plans. They have load on auto shed plans as well. And so all of those things are out there. But again, it's just the not really thinking that it'll ever get to that dire of a situation. So that all came to, okay, KEPCO, as a non-transmission owner, essentially paper G&T, who doesn't have a policy or plan for such a scenario, what do we do? And so once the denial was overcome and we realized this was really happening, it really turned to how can I, as a leader, empower, support, and collaborate with our staff, who we were all in a panic mode as to how to figure this out, but then also with our members to try to provide them the information they need to get them as ready as we could and just really get ready to take action in a short amount of time. So the next challenge quickly became, how do we effectively communicate, learn as we go, react without overreacting, and doing all of that on a real-time basis. First and foremost, we started the communications with our members. As soon as we heard anything from the Southwest Power Pool and the transmission owners that we interconnect with, we just started to share as much information as we could with our members. And that started out with emails and phone calls. We ended up doing some group text messages too. I would just text message all of the 16 member managers with each update that was substantive that they could be prepared for. We also requested that our members start operating their behind-the-meter generation, as I mentioned earlier. A lot of them have diesel generators behind the meter, and we said, hey, as much as you can get fuel supply there and the right winter mix to prevent gelling, give us all you got, run all you can. And we also asked them to work with their members to do anything they could to conserve, and then also even to the point of curtailing if that was a possibility out there. And then we tried to somehow prepare ourselves and our members for the curtailments. Trying to let our members know that, hey, if and when it gets to this, we're going to have minimal notice. We're not going to know where. We're not going to know which locations are going to be impacted. We think essential services like hospitals and retirement communities will be avoided, but we don't know for sure. And so trying to get that messaging out, which is tough. It's tough to message things that you're not fully sure about yourselves. It's sometimes tough to message the things we do know really well. So to get that message out there was challenging as well. And then the damage control. You could really sense from our members instant angst, panic. They were calling folks in other states and hearing things and calling us to say, oh my gosh, we heard this. Is this what's going to happen? And so really trying to help keep them calm, to dispel rumors, to help with any of the misinformation that was out there was also quickly became a full-time job, and definitely wasn't anything that was healthy or helpful to have all of that, but I also understand we're all human too. The transmission owners that we work with were very much in the moment, and so working with them to get the information, all the information possible that we could from them was challenging, and I don't fault them at all. They were, again, in that uncharted territory trying to make it all happen. But when we're relying on them and the SPP for information and they're in the moment, that made it a little bit challenging as well as far as getting information to pass along to our members. The other big challenge throughout all of this is our 20 megawatt diesel station that I mentioned earlier was essentially dispatched around the clock for over a week. And we self-man that. And so next thing you know, we have our staff that's out either on site or remotely operating these units around the clock. They themselves at their houses might be without power. They might have other challenges there going on, as we all do in our lives. But then we also had the fuel supply issue, making sure we had trucks continuously coming to keep the units fueled. Some thankfully fairly minor operational issues we were dealing with real time, and then trying to keep the fuel from gelling. Again, was a really big concern there, but our staff, they stepped up to the plate and did an amazing job. So then the challenge after everything occurred was really mitigating the aftermath. So of course the cost side of things, what was that going to look like for us? And then what did we learn from the curtailments, and what are some additional things there that should this happen again, we can be better prepared for? The cost side of things, and again, compared to many of our brother and sister cooperatives, we were pretty lucky. Fairly insulated with some of our long-term cost-based rate agreements, and then our owned and purchased resources performed amazingly well. So our nuclear plant ran great the whole time, our coal unit ran great, hydro resources ran great, and overall our diesel generators ran well as well. We did have a small portion of our load that was subjected to the energy market pricing, and so it was unhedged, so we knew there would be some definite risk there. All that being said, currently as we stand today, knowing that there are still some additional resettlements, there are still investigations going on at the local and federal levels, none of us in the room know how that's all going to shake out and what that'll mean. But currently, as things stand today, our energy-related costs associated that we can directly attribute to Uri came in at about 7 times what we had budgeted for February. And so we were able, being a self-governed cooperative, which is such a valuable thing in times like this, in all times, but especially times like this, our board did decide to amortize those costs over 24 months. And so the ultimate end-use consumer has really seen minimal impact to date. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a bit. The curtailment side of things, so a lot of member angst and frustration once the curtailments were done. Not all of our members were hit. And so we had some members that maybe just had one delivery point that was out, one substation that was out. We had others where half their system or more than half their system was out. So that was a challenging thing to navigate. We had varying durations. Some of our members were hit one day and the next day. Some were hit twice on the same day. And so then the big discussion became, okay, rolling blackouts. What's the definition of rolling? Because we went into it thinking, okay, the typical manual load shed plan, you're going to hit this block, see if it gets what you need. You're going to go to this next block, see if it gets what you need. And the likelihood that you're going to be hit again is minimized. And so we had kind of gone into it thinking in that regard. And so then when members were hit twice within one day or consecutive days and others hadn't been hit at all, that was really tough to work through and to make sure we were messaging and understanding. One of the big takeaways in addressing that particular item is the fact that we did learn in working with our transmission owner partners that they have certain amounts of load that are set up on auto shedding. And so if frequency drops below a certain level, those substations and or circuits automatically drop. And so during a manual load shed plan, a manual directive from SPP, they can't touch those loads. They've got to keep those ready and protected and automated if and when frequency drops and they need to have those loads drop. And so they could only touch the substations and circuits that were the manual side of things. And so that helped give a lot of clarity and helped really relieve a lot of the angst out there. So as far as ongoing challenges associated with Winter Storm Uri, really going forward, okay, we got through it here, we've got the cost side of things figured out. What did we learn? How can we implement those things that we learned? How can we plan, if heaven forbid this were to happen again? We're working, we've kicked off the process to amend our emergency response plan to assure we've got something in there that gives staff a great guideline as to what to do if this were to happen again. And then we are teeing off the process of officially creating an energy emergency policy among our members so that it's very black and white as to what KEPCO's responsibilities will be if this were to occur, what we ask of our members, what the expectations for our members, and what we're going to ask of our members should this occur, so that we're not quite flying by the seat of our pants like we were in February. So those conversations and enhancements have been kicked off. As I mentioned earlier, the board did approve a 24-month amortization. And I tell you what, one of the greatest things that's been highlighted throughout this, when you can take positives out of something that was negative, is that value of being a cooperative. So being self-governed, really exhibiting cooperatives, helping our communities, having concern for community, all of that was so highlighted and was such a blessing to be able to do so in this dire situation. We happened to be in a position going into the storm where we were long in cash. We also had access to low-cost financing. And so we were able to go ahead and be the bank for our members and then, again, as I mentioned, amortize that over. So we were able to defer the costs and we just cash flowed it all, and then we're working with our members over the next 21 months now to essentially be the bank for them. So that was an opportunity to really be able to highlight that value. So that's a quick summary of KEPCO's experience and my experience leading through Winter Storm Uri.
Thank you, Suzanne. As you mentioned, Winter Storm Uri posed a lot of challenges for not just cooperatives, but our customers and IOUs. It was a tough February. Donna, you talked about in closing Merom focusing on the possibilities. How did focusing on the possibilities and that optimistic mindset help your team?
That has been incredibly important for us because there's nothing easy about transitioning half of your portfolio at one time. We think about the challenge of going out and finding the replacement resources, and that is a set of challenges with opportunities as well. But we also think about, though, the challenges around operating a facility that you're not investing in any longer. So that makes day-to-day operations become even more challenging as we move towards 2023. And the workforce that's there dealing with those challenges, their mindset is also, what does my future look like? And so we've had a number of employees who have found their next opportunity elsewhere, and that's great. I mean, we want them to do that. But for those employees who remain, as we bring in new temporary labor to help with that, that's a new dynamic that is difficult for them to do. So there's challenges around that as well. And Sonia, you mentioned the safety part. Definitely when you have folks and employees who are distracted for whatever the reason may be, safety becomes a big challenge as well. And so if we only focused on those challenges, it could be overwhelming at times. But when you're looking into the future and you're saying, I'm going through this now because it's a better future. It's a better future for the member consumers, and that's why I'm doing it. It gets you through those challenges and you find the solutions because I'm not going to stay here in this challenge forever. I'm moving into the opportunity. And so to me, that mindset is incredibly important. It makes all the difference in the world about successfully executing on that plan or really not being successful at it.
Thank you, Donna. I think attitude and how you look at something is super important to how you face a challenge head on. As Donna mentioned, Sonia, you talked about your safety meetings and about virtual safety meetings. How did you implement virtual safety meetings, and how successful do you think those safety meetings were at helping safety at SMECO?
As far as implementing them, we have a software package that we purchased, and that has a bunch of different types of training on it. So the things that, like bloodborne pathogens and that sort of stuff that we have to do every year is very easy to do in that way. And we can track when people have taken their training and when they haven't. We send reminders. So I think those were successful or have been very successful. But we still need the one-on-one, non-virtual with the field crews. So the tailgate briefings, pre-job, have been very instrumental in making sure that the guys stay safe and they're thinking about what they're working on instead of being distracted. I've been on some safety observation. I mentioned that I've been in the field, so I've done several safety observations on the job site, and they all take it very seriously. They know how dangerous it can be, so they listen, they participate in the tailgate briefings. The virtual and online training has been very beneficial for the inside folks, but the outside crews still need to have that touch point and have that face-to-face with the pre-jobs. And we've also implemented where we're asking employees if they see something that could become a possible issue to please report that. So that has actually picked up. And they've been doing a lot more of that themselves, where they report a possible issue. And then we all get emails about that, and we talk about it in our monthly executive safety briefing. And then the other thing that we do is we were having a lot of vehicle incidents, as I mentioned. So anytime somebody has a preventable vehicle accident, then they have to come meet with me. So, and explain to me how it happened and how they're going to prevent it from the future. So that's some of the ways we've kept safety as top of mind.
As we all know, safety with electricity is paramount. Like there's no room for error here. Talking about room for error, Suzanne, you talked about the TOP or the transmission operator shedding load in your area. and those directives come immediately, and your response time is very short. How did you lead through that unknown circumstance?
It was very challenging. We, as I mentioned earlier, were learning basically real time as our members were learning as to what areas would be impacted. So we were either getting phone calls from members or for sure watching our SCADA system to see when those substations and locations would be lost. A lot of it was the talking with the transmission owners, doing everything we could to find out duration, location, any kind of information. One of the things that was challenging, that added to the challenge, was one of our transmission owners had made some attempts to contact a couple of our members directly and give them a heads up as to which substations would be impacted, and then lo and behold, other substations were impacted. And so trying to even deal with some of that too, to where it was just really kind of a mess. So how do you lead through that? And again, not having any control over what was going on, not knowing what was necessarily going to be happening next, that's a tough challenge to have to kind of really lead through. The other thing that was challenging is, our staff, as I mentioned earlier, was just exhausted working through everything. They were nervous, didn't know what was going to be happening next. Several of them, myself included, were out of power at our homes, and we were all largely still working from home. This was still very much during the pandemic time, and so all of those things made it additionally challenging. The key for me as a leader was to stay calm, and that's not always my go-to. So, but making sure that I stayed calm because everyone was watching for my demeanor to see how we were going to get through this, right? And so making sure I was over-communicating constantly with the staff as well as with our members and our board, keeping everybody updated. As soon as more information was available, making those quick decisions when you don't necessarily have all the information yet. And then really being flexible and innovative throughout the time period, and for sure after the storm, as I mentioned, with going forward with policies and cost recovery aspects. So a lot of different aspects to it for sure during that time.
Thank you, Suzanne. You touched on communication, and you all have as you spoke today, and you talked about how important it is to communicate often and timely and effectively with your staff. Donna, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned in your opening about closing Merom that you have staff that is still at Merom and you plan to transition them to hopefully a new role or a new initiative as the plant closed. How important to you as a leader is offering opportunities to your staff for retraining?
Oh, it's incredibly important. And one of the things I mentioned that part of our resource plan that the board approved, it's about moving towards a new type of resource mix, and that includes, with it, the closing of the Merom station. But also that plan included the transitioning the site, as I mentioned, and transitioning the employees, so on to their next opportunity for those that are impacted. And of our over 400 employees, we estimated early on that about 189 of those folks would be impacted by Merom's closing. So one of the things that we did, in addition to exploring, maybe early retirement options for those that are close to that point in their career, we also have a number of younger workers at the Merom station, and they're not close to retirement. So we worked with Indiana State University to develop a new program. It's a certification in emerging energy technology, and it's something that's only available to Hoosier Energy employees. And we worked with them to create the program that is specific to our system. And what it's going to do is it trains employees for positions over on the transmission side of the business, specifically in the communications and meter relay areas. And that's an area where we have a future need with retirements that are coming up in that area. And it's not just Hoosier Energy, it's other utilities in the state and beyond the state, and even some of our members who have needs for that type of skill set in the future. So it's matching up those employees that are going to need another opportunity with where we see a need in the future. And so that's something that we're pretty excited about, and we estimate that we can get 60 folks through that program between when we kicked it off and when Merom will retire. It's comprised of a series of online courses as well as then a hands-on lab. Towards the end of it, it takes folks about a year to get through that. And while that's fantastic and we offer that, once you get into things, then you find that there are some new challenges that maybe you didn't think about. And one of those has been that it's very math intensive. And so we've had some employees that have gotten into it and then said, this is not for me. And so we've had to learn about that and think, okay, well, what can we do then? Can we get some employees maybe some educational updates before they get into the program? So it's a constant learning. But I think just having an open mindset about, hey, this is something that hadn't been out there before, and we can do that for employees. I think that's what keeps you motivated, right, to keep going on. So that's one of the things that we've done in that area.
Thank you, Donna. I've heard you speak about it here today and a little bit before just in passing, and it's very exciting, to see what you guys are doing at Merriam and for your staff. Donna, you aren't the only one that is having some organizational changes. Sonia mentioned that she did some organizational changes, hired some new people. How do you think that those changes strengthened your cooperative today?
Well, I think with the hiring of the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer, it helps us to focus more on being innovative and looking to the future for changes that are coming in the industry that we've talked about some of those here today, like, and throughout the conference, battery storage, electric vehicles, and how they're going to increase and how we can use battery storage on our system. So this gives us a focus, a person an individual who has that as his responsibility, and it helps to have somebody who has ownership of that. And I kind of look at it like we did with our enterprise risk management program. So we have an owner for that, right? So you work with all of the business, but you have somebody who owns that and makes sure that things get done and is able to sort of spearhead that for us. So I think that's definitely helped us to strengthen our direction that we want to go in for innovation. I had to hire a CFO to replace me. I promoted from within, so that's been a good transition and also helped to strengthen the team. And the Chief Operating Officer was also a promotion from within. And so, he's known, all of us have a similar sort of culture, philosophy as far as, not only do we put members first, but we put employees first. So we have a big focus right now on our employee population and morale issues and just trying to figure out what the issues are there and why we're having some morale problems. And we have a heavy focus as an executive team on that and trying to turn that around. So I think I have a very good, strong executive team. I have a lot of support from the board, and I think we're going to make things. We're a great co-op already. Those of you who know Joe Slater, he left it in good shape for me to take over. But we're going to continue to grow and make things better as we go along, and I think I have the team to do that.
That sounds very impressive, Sonia. You talked about, the ownership and making sure that people are bought in. And Suzanne, you talked about the ownership of your cooperative and how you're structured being an asset to you in this winter storm. How are you demonstrating that value add of being a cooperative to your membership?
That's a great question. I think, again, especially the first couple meetings that we had, we called a special board meeting, and we've had several meetings with our board after to really work through things. And to be able to, and I'm still fairly new in the cooperative side of things, so the self-governed ability to just sit in a boardroom and decide. The first month, we just went ahead and established a cap on our ECA, so at least our members would know what to expect as we were still figuring out what costs were going to be coming through. And so being able to just sit in a room and talk through that and make that decision real time was such a value. And then once we knew more information, being able to make a recommendation and ultimately get the board's approval on that. I think the other big thing was just helping in the messaging to be able to help our members message to their members. And that was challenging because things were so evolving. And so we would come up with these speaking points and talk all about the value of cooperatives and here's what we're going to do to help. And our members would send those out in their own publications and even at their annual meetings in some cases. And then we'd get more information and things would change a little bit as far as what we had kind of communicated out. So a little bit of a challenge there that we worked through. But I think really being able to focus on that self-governed side, to really work together and really cooperate among all of us and hit a lot of those core principles of being a cooperative really came into play. So.
Thank you, Suzanne. I think we're all very appreciative of the co-op structure and what cooperatives mean, not just to us who are employed by them, but to our membership. At this time, we have about 15 minutes of our panel left, and we're going to open the questions to the audience. There are 2 mic runners, and there's also 2 mics in the center aisle. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and one of our mic runners will run to you. Or if you would prefer, please step to the center aisle so that everyone on the phone can hear us.
Hi, Courtney. Back here. Hi, ladies. Great job today. I do have a question, and it's a little more of a personal question. In a male-dominated industry, how do you mold the environment to have more female leaders? And what are the steps maybe you guys took aren't necessarily the steps that I would take just because the environment is changing, the times are changing. So what advice can you give to the 20, I think it's less than 20 females here today, and what advice can you give all these males here today about changing the environment that they are in to have more female leaders?
I'm eternally grateful not to be a panelist.
Wasn't there something about give us some easy ones?
I don't know who wants to take that softball, but any takers?
I'll go for it. So no, it's a fair point, just in general with our industry, currently the demographics. One of the things, at least at KEPCO, that's been interesting is our executive team went from male-dominated, we had our CFO as a female, overnight to being now female-dominated with me in the CEO role, and then our general counsel that I hired, and she literally walked in the same day I did, also being female. And so that's been a little bit of an interesting dynamic change in the sense that just from a not only bringing my own style to it perspective, but having such a change pretty dramatically. And frankly, overcoming, you could sense a little bit of even our board and the rest of the staff kind of getting used to the style change a little bit with some things. But I think it's one of those that throughout, and again, with all of us up here being in the industry a long time, you move forward in working hard and doing all of the things that you want to do and aspire to do as a leader. Just so happens we happen to be female. But it's one of those things that in bringing our own style, in looking at those morale things, I know we've been looking at that a lot as well. There might be some different approaches that we take as females. Right. Than nothing against our male counterparts, but there are some different ways we might approach some of those things. And so I know, always being mindful of that, and always being understanding of others' feelings along the way, but just doing our very best in leading in our roles has been my mantra anyway. So.
One thing I might add to Suzanne's observations too is that I would encourage, and I do encourage women to apply for leadership jobs, because one of the things I thought was interesting when I applied for the CEO position at Hoosier Energy, that in nearly 100 applications, I think 4 were women. And so, women need to apply. And I've talked about this before in different venues, but it's kind of interesting in that, there's some studies around that show that women tend not to apply for leadership, managerial positions, unless they feel like they're fully qualified at that moment to fill that position. And, I think on the male side of things, the studies show that men think, hey, I'm 50% there, whatever the percent, I can learn the rest, and I think that's right. I think that applies to all of us. And so I would encourage women to overcome, if you have that hesitancy, to overcome that and actually apply and go for it. So that's the first step, is to be there, is to be in the process. That's one thing that I would encourage younger women today to do. Because you'll figure it out when you get there. Right?
I would just add that I think if you have somebody that you look up to and that can mentor you, that's a great help. I had a mentor, it happened to be a male, which was Joe Slater, but he helped me to improve my leadership skills. One of the things that I'm doing now is we're looking throughout our organization, not just at females, but we're not a very diverse industry in general, so we're also looking at programs directed towards more diversity, and so we're doing some executive coaching of some candidates in our shop, and trying to, when we have openings, we go to different publications where we can get more diverse candidate pools. So we're really looking to put a plan around that. And but I think having a mentor is a big help, and somebody that you can talk to and run things by. And I agree wholeheartedly with Donna that women tend not to apply for things if they don't have every single qualification that's listed in the job listing, and I think we can learn things on the job.
Thank you, ladies, for your answer. Are there any other questions in the audience? Mike?
Go to the mic here. Sonia, you were talking about morale, and you've got some morale challenges, and I don't know if you're at a root cause point or not, or you're just do you suspect that's around COVID? And was kind of curious about, is it folks at home and transitioning back into the office? Did you have a thought or feeling about what that was? And I kind of got a sense that maybe Suzanne, Donna, maybe you had some challenges. I don't know if I'm leading down a direction, but I was just curious, was it a unique situation, or do you think it was, well, obviously COVID's unique. Do you think it was around COVID, or do you think it's around some other issues?
Issues that we are having, I'm sure COVID didn't help those, but they started before COVID. We did some focus groups, Mike, last week, just to get some more information. I started getting a lot of reports and employees coming to me to talk about things when I first took over. So instead of just taking that handful of information that I had, I wanted to go out into, this is in the field crews mostly, I wanted to go out into the entire employee population on that side, the field crew side, and just do these focus groups just to see if we could drill down to find out exactly what the morale issues are. I think we have a good idea at this point. I had a pretty good idea before they started. So now we have the information we need to be able to move forward and make things better. I don't think COVID helped at all either, but.
And I guess I have a follow-up question, and maybe it's to the panel too. Maybe you can all comment about back to work, how you've gone with those challenges. Are you all back? What are you doing? Are you transitioning? We've had some discussions, I think, around the breakfast with, hey, what are we going to do around telecommuting policies going forward? Maybe you all could share your thoughts and comments.
I can sure start on that one. We, as of a couple weeks ago, have everybody back. My position with staff had been all along until vaccines are readily available in our area. We'll continue to work from home for the most part. We had a handful of us had been back for quite a while. And we did kind of a methodical return approach, but we have everybody back. And that was an interesting thing because when I came to KEPCO, working from home wasn't really a thing. And I had been at the IOU side of things where I worked from home all the time. And so it was really an interesting thing I think we had some folks going into it that thought, oh, this will never work, and both staff and our board. And then to have everybody at home, I'm sure like most of you in here as well, and keep everything going, keep the same level of productivity was really neat to see. Where I've left it, Mike, is just to say, okay, let's get everybody back. Let's do a reset. We had a big celebration barbecue to, celebrate everybody being back. And then I said, okay, I'm open to the discussion to look going forward at doing some flexible kinds of things as far as work from home. We're currently really case-by-case basis. I leave it to the supervisors at their discretion. If the plumber's coming between noon and 4, and you need to be home, work from home, or have a kid at home occasionally, the case-by-case is fine. But from a long-term flexible working schedule, we're going to evaluate going forward. So.
Yeah, for us, we have, about 80% of our workforce are operational in nature. So, throughout the pandemic, they had to be at the power plants and system control, out in the field in different ways. We had, obviously, different kinds of protocols to keep them safe, depending on what that looked like. So for us, we're talking about maybe 20% of our workforce that would normally report to an office. And so where we are is, throughout the pandemic, we had ebbs and flows, right? So as things kind of looked better, last summer, we opened up and said, hey, if you need to be in the office because maybe you have poor internet connectivity or you have multiple people trying to work at your home, if you're more productive to be in the office, you can be. Just let us know so we can do the social distancing and make sure we don't have a lot of people in one space. So we've had flexibility like that, and then we had to pull back on that in the fall, in the winter when things got really tight again. We'd have to say, okay, we're not doing that anymore for safety reasons. We can't do it. But where we are now with the vaccines and things on the upside, we're going to have all of the office workers back in on July 6th. And the magic around that date was we looked at it, and it was right after the CDC. We were already looking at what we're going to do, and then the CDC came out with their announcement that kind of threw things open, I think, for many of us. And then Monroe County, where we're headquartered, had been very conservative throughout the pandemic, and so it took them a few days longer to catch up with the CDC, but they did. But when we announced and we told employees, hey, we're going to all be back on July 6th, that gave anybody who had not, and maybe they've been on the fence about whether or not to get the vaccine, to get one if they wanted to and get through that series and be fully protected by the time we hit July 6th. So that's kind of how we centered on that date. But around the July 6th date, we're not planning to change any of our policies. What we've always said is, as employees, your job responsibilities determine what hours you need to work and where you need to be on any given day. For some of us, that means, certain days we need to be out at member systems. Certain days we need to have engineering folks out in the sites where projects are taking place. So that won't change. But what COVID taught us is that we can be a lot more flexible in our thinking around that than we had been and still be really successful. So without changing policies or putting into place an official kind of teleworking, we're really kind of approaching it like pre-COVID, knowing that we can be more flexible. And so we're gonna try that and evaluate it after about 60 days and see what it looks like. Yeah.
We have some employees who want to come back to work. So what we're doing is, as of July 1st, if you want to be back in the office, you can be. But as of September 1st, everybody will be back. And we will have a more flexible schedule as far as flex time or teleworking. I'm not going to have anybody teleworking full time. But we will be allowing up to 2 days a week teleworking at supervisor's discretion, so I'm leaving it to supervisors as well. But I've been in the office the whole time, and a lot of my members of my direct team have been there. And I think employees are ready to come back, and I'm trying not to be selfish because I'm definitely ready for them to come back. But we still have a lot of child daycare issues and things like that need to be set up. So that's why we said September 1st as the day to have everybody back. That gives people time to take care of those types of things.
Thank you. At this time, we don't have any more time for questions, but I hope that all of you had a chance to listen to the insights that these ladies were able to provide. It was nice to hear about communication is important and it's key. It was insightful to hear about your cooperatives. And if you have any questions for these ladies that you did not get the opportunity to ask, they will be around for the remainder of this half day. And with that, please join me in thanking the ladies for being a panelist today.